So we were talking about the evolution of sex. The advantage of asexual reproduction is it's faster, and a lot of organisms that exploit rich resources but don't have any time to do it will switch hit. They will pump up their numbers with an asexual stage. But then the surviving asexuals will move into a sexual phase. This is actually something you could see right about this time of year, probably not too far from this building. These are the leaves of sumac. And sumac gets parasitized by Malaphus roas, the sumac gall aphid. And okay, what a gall is usually it's an insect, penetrates into plant tissues and stimulates the plant tissues to start dividing. Basically, the insect causes the plant to grow a tumor. And inside the swelling, inside the gall, the insect may reproduce. It may certainly can eat a lot, and eventually it will break out of the gall and go fly off and do its own thing. Gall aphids, sumac gall aphids, Malaphus roas, undergo a sexual stage living on moss. The sexually produced larvae fly up and latch onto a sumac leaf and burrow into the sumac leaf, stimulate the leaf cells to start dividing and dividing and dividing again, and create these swellings that can get up to about golf ball size on sumac leaves. Within that, the asexually produced, the larvae inside start reproducing asexually. They start, each one produces offspring, and they'll go through several rounds of asexual reproduction, pump up their numbers, and eat all of the inside of the gall. The gall ends up just being kind of a hollow bag. So why is that adaptive? Asexual reproduction is fast. You can crank out lots of offspring and take full advantage of this resource while it's available. Once the gall has been completely hollowed out, the asexuals leave and transform into a sexual generation that comes down to the moss and reproduces sexually there. So you get that switch hitting a lot on especially insects that feed on very rich food supply but have a limited time to do it. You'll see it as well in things like the flies that live on, or the aphids that live on mushrooms, which are also a very rich food supply, but one that's not going to last. You get it in many parasites. I mentioned that those pond snails in New Zealand were affected by a type of parasite called a fluke. Well, that right there is a pond snail, and every one of those little grayish flecks in the water is the larva of a fluke, a type of larva called a Cercaria larva. And what happened is that fluke got penetrated by, not the fluke, the snail got penetrated by one fluke larva, and inside the snail, that one fluke larva has gone through multiple rounds of asexual reproduction, and now tens of thousands of fluke larvae are bursting out. And at this stage, these larvae, to pass to the next stage of the life cycle, they will eventually have to infect a vertebrate. Exactly how they're going to do that depends on species. The odds are fairly low that any one of these larvae that are bursting out of the snail is going to make it to a vertebrate host. But fortunately, there are hundreds of thousands of fluke larvae that are all genetically identical bursting out, increasing the odds that at least one of them is going to make it. So when you need to crank up the reproduction like crazy, you go asexual. In the gall aphids, it's because there's a rich resource but limited time to exploit it. In the parasites, it's because the odds are low that they'll make it to the vertebrate host. So what is adaptive in this case is wrapping up asexual reproduction to increase the odds that one will make it. So that's why you get switch hitting life histories at some points, predominantly sexual life histories, and purely asexual organisms are relatively rare. Now that we're talking about sex, kind of shifting gears a little bit and talk about some of the niceties of sexual reproduction. There's a surprising number of species that turn out to have more than two sexes, or they may have two sexes, but multiple genders. What do I mean by that? It's fairly common to have species where you have two different types of male, looking physically very different. There are large males that may be called garters, and garters will pair up with females and try to defend the females against intruders. And that species may have a second type of male called a sneaker male or a cuckolder male. And these males tend to be very small, and they will try to slip past the garters and mate with females. Sometimes the sneaker males fool the garters because they look like females. And sometimes the sneaker males will rely on small size or stealth or speed to get past the garters. These are cuttlefish. They're not true fish. They are, in fact, relatives of squid. And on the left, you've got a female. On the right, a sneaker male is mating with her. He is small and unobtrusive, and he's managed to slip past the large garter male and is slipping her some of his sperm. And hopefully we'll be able to finish the job before the garter male figures out what's going on. This is an invasive species in the Great Lakes. It's called the round goby. Gobies tend to be bottom dwellers and prop themselves up on their fins. This one's sitting on a bed of, looks like clamshells. And typical males expend a great deal of energy in sexual reproduction. And we're going to come back to this, that different species and different sexes within one species invest different amounts of energy on sexual reproduction. And in this species, the males have to work pretty hard because the males will build nests on the bottom and guard the nests. They'll try to attract females to come and lay their eggs in the nest, but the males do all of the child care. They will sit on top of the eggs and fan them with their fins to make sure the eggs get enough oxygen. So in this species, your typical male has to work really hard, has to build the nest, court the female, care for the eggs. But there's a second type of male. There's a garden male at the top and a sneaker male at the bottom. And the sneaker males, when they spot a goby couple that's mating, the sneaker males will just slip in and fire off some sperm in what's hopefully the right direction and then beat it, fertilizing the female's eggs, but not having to invest all of that energy in nest building and offspring guarding. Obviously, if you had a species that was nothing but sneaker males, the species would not be able to reproduce. But as long as you have a life history strategy where the males have to invest a great deal, it will be adaptive for at least a limited number of males to be sneaker males. Okay, you with me there? I should mention, by the way, this is something we didn't talk about earlier, and I wish we'd had time for it. There's a phenomenon called density-dependent selection. And when we went over fitness, We talked about how each genotype has a fitness value that's basically a measurement of relative probability of reproduction, right? Yes? Well, that's not always an absolute number. There can be genotypes that can have a high fitness when they're rare, but a low fitness if they become common. And when fitness is a function of the frequency like that, instead of just being a number that's the same no matter what situation you're in, we call that density-dependent selection. So if we had a population of all garter males and one sneaker male is born or migrates in or something like that, that one sneaker has lots of opportunities to pass on his genes because he produces lots of sperm and can fertilize a whole bunch of eggs and doesn't have to invest energy in building nests or caring for young. So if almost everybody is a garter, the sneaker males do pretty well. It's a strategy that works to slip in and fertilize females' eggs when the male isn't looking. On the other hand, if you had a population where almost everybody was a sneaker, the population might not survive at all because nobody would be building nests, courting females, and guarding eggs. So above a certain point, being a sneaker male no longer carries a high fitness, right? If the population of sneakers is too high, then it starts becoming disadvantageous to be a sneaker male. So again, fitness is not necessarily absolutely fixed. Fitness can vary with the proportion of a genotype in that population, and we call that density-dependent selection. Oh, here's another example. This is fun. There's bluegills, popular fish to catch around here, and quite tasty, I might add. And good old Lepomus macrochirus. Bluegills have two types of male. What you're looking at here is a parental male. That's a big male, and like the goby, these males excavate nests on the bottom of a lake and try to entice females to come down and lay their eggs. So this parental male has excavated a nest and attracted a female, this one right here. And unfortunately, he doesn't get to fertilize all of her eggs because right there is a sneaker male. And in this species, the sneaker male, the sneakers are younger, and sneaker males will transform into a different type of deceptive male, a female mimic, when they get larger. So sneaker males can slip in and fertilize a female's eggs by being small and fast. As they grow, they become female mimics, which can slip in and fertilize a female's eggs because they don't freak out the parental male. If another parental male came in, that parental would try to drive him away, but the parental is not threatened by females. So some of the males come to look like females, and they can sneakily fertilize the eggs of the real females because the parental males don't see them as a threat. In this species, the difference is genetic. In other species, it seems to be environmental, and males might be able to switch. I don't know, it's funny. There have been some state governors that have been freaking out about the possibility of, transgender men dressing up like women so they can sneak into women's bathrooms and do something horrible with the ladies inside. Humans don't actually do that, but bluegills actually do. So I kind of wonder if the governor of Texas is going to be banning bluegills anytime soon. It's not really a strategy that humans engage in, but fish, they do it all the time. Oh, and then you've got 3 different males in this small arthropod. This is an isopod type of crustacean. These live in the ocean, but the isopods you know best would be roly-polies or pill bugs or whatever you call them. Those are actually crustaceans. These live inside sponges, and the large one is an alpha type male, and these will defend a territory and try to attract females to their territory and then defend them in the territory. In the center, a beta male will try to mate with females by sneaking past the alpha because the betas look like females. And then on the far left, that's a gamma male that's very small and fast and is basically a sperm bomber. The gamma male will swim in fast, fertilize some eggs, and then beat it before the alpha male can get there. So you can actually have 3 different types of male in one species at the same time. And then we even get things like this. This is, I've seen these guys before. This is a lizard you find out in the western US. It's the western side-blotched lizard, Euta stansberriana. And it happens to come in 3 different color forms, orange throat, blue throat, and yellow throat. You can see the color differences there. And orange-throated males aggressively defend groups of females. They keep so-called harems. They'll defend multiple females. The problem is that because they have many females to defend, they can't be everywhere at once. So the yellow-throated males, who are sneaky, can slip in and copulate with one of an orange's females. However, yellow-throated males get driven off by blue-throated males, which mate monogamously. A blue-throated male will guard a single female. So a blue throat one can guard a single female and defend against a yellow, but the blue is not big enough to stand up to an orange. So blues lose their females to oranges. Oranges get their females stolen by yellow males, and yellow males get driven away by blues. So basically evolution has learned how to play rock, paper, scissors. Right? You have played this before, right? Where every one of the 3 shapes you can throw beats a second one and is beaten by a third, right? Paper wraps rock. What is it? Paper wraps rock. Rock crushes scissors. Scissors cut paper. Yes? Okay. Same thing here. We've got 3 separate male types, each one of which can take females from another and can lose females to the third. Isn't that cool? Yeah, and this is another case where you've got density-dependent selection. If you had almost all oranges, then any yellow that comes along is going to be able to steal a lot of copulations and is going to be very successful. On the other hand, if that means that yellows become more common, then any blue is going to be successful because that blue is going to be able to drive off a yellow. On the other hand, if we have lots of blues, then the oranges are going to come along and kick sand in the blues' face and take their women. But then if orange becomes common, then they're vulnerable to the yellows. So no single strategy can ever permanently dominate. And if any one strategy becomes the most common, that means that another strategy suddenly gets an advantage. Oops. There, did I do that right? So again, that's a special case of density-dependent selection, where whichever strategy is the most rare becomes the one that's favored. But if it becomes common, it stops being favored. And in fact, the gent who has studied these has shown that the frequencies of all 3 tend to fluctuate in a fairly regular cycle that takes several years. And that's what you would expect. Each time one becomes common, the counter strategy becomes favored, but nobody ever permanently wins. All right, are we happy there? Everybody feeling like you've just gained so much knowledge it's practically coming out of your ears? All right, all right. Well, males and females can be problematic, so there's lots of species that actually decide to do both. Hermaphrodites produce gametes of both sexes over the course of a lifetime. Individuals that are simultaneous hermaphrodites might produce both eggs and sperm at the same time. These simultaneous hermaphrodites that you have seen most would probably be earthworms. Each earthworm has both an ovary and a testis, and when two earthworms meet, they glue each other together with mucus, and then each one passes sperm to the other. And it's more or less an even trade. So earthworms are simultaneous hermaphrodites. Sequential hermaphrodites begin as one sex and then change to the other. So in a sequential hermaphroditic species, each species might spend some time as one sex, and if it survives, will change its sex and function as the opposite sex. You can either start as a male and later become female, in which case your species is protandrous, and you're practicing protandry. Andros is Greek for a male, so, and proto is first, so protandry is male first. Protogyne, gyne is female, as in misogynist and gynecologist and all of that. Protogyne is female first. You start out as a female and then you switch to becoming a male. And again, these are all perfectly explainable in terms of selection, because in many species, strategies like this maximize the chance that you're going to have of successfully reproducing. So for example, that's a Caribbean fish found on coral reefs called the butter hamlet. These are simultaneous hermaphrodites, and two of these fish will mate for several days, repeatedly switching between male and female. So one will release eggs while the other releases sperm, and after a few minutes they will swap roles and keep on going for a couple of days that way. Again, earthworms are another great example. Here's a protandrous species. This is the clownfish. And clownfish are territorial. They live in sea anemones. Sea anemones are invertebrates that can sting most fish, but clownfish have immunity. And in anemones, each anemone will have a family group of a mature male and a mature female and immature males. Now, the immature males, by the way, usually disperse in from elsewhere. The immature males in the family group are not necessarily the offspring of the mature male and the mature female. But if you remove the female, the largest immature male becomes the new male, and the mature male becomes female. To put it another way, if Pixar had only consulted with me on the script of Finding Nemo, what would happen is that Marlin would be trying to raise Nemo. At the same time, Marlin would be grappling with the fact that he was transitioning to Marlena. And I think this would make for a much more interesting movie, right? As you know, there are families these days that have to go through that, you know, where one parent has children, but the parent is transitioning to, you know, a different gender. And sometimes this can create problems, although it's nothing that a well-adjusted family can't learn to cope with as long as everybody loves each other. So I think that would have made a much better movie. but Pixar did not ask me. But yeah, just remember when you watch that movie that Marlin is supposed to be becoming Marlena, because that's the way that real clownfish live. And Nemo would not actually be Marlena's offspring, so Nemo would be growing up rapidly and eventually going to mate with Marlena to produce the next generation of clownfish. See, much better movie, right? Much more emotional depth and complexity there. You know, a much better movie for our times, and perfectly biologically accurate. This is what real clownfish do.
So they don't have to worry about it.
Well, yeah, the immature males have dispersed from other anemones and come to live there. So yeah, if it was a real movie, Nemo would be Marlin's adopted kid. And as soon as, who was Nemo's wife? Pearl? No, not Pearl. Coral. We only see her at the very beginning before she gets eaten by the barracuda, I think it is. Okay, anyway, she gets eaten. So yeah, as soon as she was removed, Marlin would start transitioning to be the mature female. So there. If you want protogyny, those are some California fish called sheephead wrasses, living in kelp beds. Off the coast of California, you get some areas where you have these very long brown seaweeds, kelp, that can grow 50 feet or longer and produce these underwater forests. And I'm not even joking, that really is what they are, that are home to an incredible diversity of organisms. And some of them are these sheephead wrasses. And these all begin life as females. And after about 4 to 9 years, if they live long enough, they'll start developing that black banded pattern that you see in the fish on the right and switch to becoming males. So this sort of thing happens all the time. And if you're wondering why on earth they would do it, you often find simultaneous hermaphrodites in environments where populations are very sparse. Individuals cannot easily find each other because they're so few and far between. Or when organisms are sessile, meaning they're permanently attached to one spot and they can't leave. Simultaneous hermaphroditism ensures that any two individuals can reproduce. I mean, it would really suck if you were a male earthworm. Think about it. If you're an earthworm, you spend your life burrowing in total darkness in the soil. It's not going to be that often that you're going to find another earthworm, right? Yes. And it would really suck if the only earthworm that you ever found happened to be also male, the same gender as you, right? Under those circumstances, if you can function as either or both of the sexes, you've got much greater chances of reproducing successfully. This is the biological realization of Woody Allen's old joke back in the 70s, that he was thinking about going bisexual because it would double his chance to get a date. That was intended as a joke, but in fact, it's quite serious in the case of earthworms, or in the case of the tripod fish, which, yes, really does rest on the ocean bottom on very highly elongated fin rays. The deep ocean populations in most areas are really sparse. There's little food. The only source of fixed carbon is basically a slow rain of fecal pellets and dead bodies from up in the photic zone. There's not a great deal of influx of food coming in. So a lot of deep sea organisms are very low energy. They don't swim fast. They're not big. They'll spend a lot of time drifting or a lot of time just sitting there. So organisms in that environment cannot mount lengthy searches And it's hard to search because at great ocean depth, it's darker than the inside of a dead cow. Not that any of you have ever stuck your head in a dead cow, but hopefully you can figure out what I mean there. It is, there is absolutely no light at all except for occasional bioluminescent critters, making it very hard to find mates. So if you are a deep sea tripod fish, you know, there's a chance you might only find a couple of other members of your species, and it will be much more adaptive if you can mate with either gender. So that's a fish that's a simultaneous hermaphrodite, and the reason for it makes sense in the environment that they live in. Oh, this is cool. This is another solution to the same problem. That's a deep sea anglerfish. This is another thing they really should have put into Finding Nemo. The sexes are separate in the case of deep sea anglerfish. The females are fairly large. And as you know from Finding Nemo, the females have a fin ray that's got a little luminescent lure. So they will draw prey close to their mouths and then swallow them. Yeah, that horrible thing that almost ate Marlin and Dory with the glowing light and the enormous eyes and the great big fangs. Yeah, that thing's real. But what they didn't show you in the movie was that the sexes are separate, but in many deep sea anglerfish, the males are parasitic, meaning that a male consists of basically a testicle that can swim. The male may never actually feed. The male may have very big eyes or very big nostrils, but the only thing the male does is try to find a female. And in some species, once a male finds a female, he will simply just stay close. But in some species, what the male will do is bite onto the female, and he will not only start feeding off of her, their tissues will grow together. There we go. In this one, Melanocetus johnsoni, which is probably the species they were trying to depict in Finding Nemo, the males can still swim away, but they'll temporarily latch onto females by biting them. In other species, the male permanently latches on. And in the ghostly sea devil, the male's tissues fuse with the female's tissues, and they truly do become one flesh. The male circulatory system gets, his blood gets pumped by the females because their circulatory systems join up. He gets all of his nutrition directly from her. He never feeds. Their tissues fuse, and he basically becomes an organ stuck on the female. Hi, Brent. Howdy. Yeah, I'm just talking. 4 or 5. Yeah, I'm just teaching evolution in Arkansas is not a strong enough thrill anymore. So last Friday we talked about critical race theory, and now we're talking about gender fluidity. I feel like I need to do more to piss off the legislature. They've gotten complacent.
Are you using this from Tuesday, Thursday too?
I have been. Do you need it?
Well, they're trying to figure out scheduling.
Okay. I'm booked for 152, but I've been doing it here, but I'm actually going to move some of the labs to 152.
Okay.
I was planning to anyway. Tell me when I need to vacate. We'll work around it.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Is class till noon?
What's that?
Is class till noon?
9 till noon. Yeah.
Oh,
Theoretically, it's 9 people, but
I was like, that's what I thought.
yeah, we got 9 enrolled, but it's it's real late in the semester. Actually, it's not, but yeah, tends to happen.
Will do.
All righty. Okay, so yeah, the ghostly sea devils, the males basically become extra organs tacked onto the female. who I guess is now a sort of hermaphrodite, because she's got a male permanently latched on and fused with her tissues. I love this stuff. You could not make it up.
So they mate,
What's that?
so they mate after that?
Well, I mean, whenever she reproduces, she'll lay eggs and he'll just pop out sperm. You know, they're both attached conveniently close to where the eggs are going to come out. So yeah, he just now fertilizes her eggs and has absolutely nothing else to do. You could not make this stuff up. You know, I've sometimes thought I should try to write horror fiction and borrow ideas from these species that I study and apply them to humans. Like, imagine a case where women are walking around and they're having to drag along their boyfriends because their boyfriends have just permanently latched onto them and now don't have any mouths or head because they've just grown together with the with their girlfriends and turned into some horrible Siamese twin type thing. Wouldn't it be cool? Okay, like I said, it would make for really good horror fiction. I mean, I'm kind of glad H.P. Lovecraft didn't study biology. It might have made his stories get weird. Oh yeah, oddly enough, here's another one. This is the green spoonworm, Bonellia viridis. Her body gets up to 8 inches long, and that proboscis, the kind of green shoelace-looking thing that's sticking down into the right, can extend several feet if it's stretched. She gives birth to, well, she releases eggs that hatch into larvae, and the larvae will swim around for a little bit, and a larva that touches down on the bottom will turn into a male. A larva that touches down on the proboscis of a female develops into a dwarf parasitic male. And the males initially attach to the proboscis, but then burrow into the female's body cavity and take up residence in a specialized organ that's a modified portion of her excretory system. Basically, a female Bonellia may have dozens of nearly microscopic males living inside her kidneys. And again, you get this dwarf male phenomenon in a number of cases. Darwin actually documented it in barnacles. Remember, I mentioned that he spent years covertly, what he was trying to do was test his evolutionary ideas against the careful study of an actual group. So he studied barnacles, and he found there are species where the female is very well developed and the male consists of nothing but a little sac that contains a testis and a penis. I've had female students that have told me that they have boyfriends that are kind of like that as well. You know, it's perhaps not unknown in our own species to sometimes have parasitic males, but I digress. So simultaneous hermaphroditism works in species that aren't always able to encounter each other, like deep sea species like anglerfish, or, well, they're not really hermaphrodites, but they kind of are. And tripod fish and earthworms, and also in certain barnacles and spoonworms. And again, with barnacles being permanently attached, they can't exactly go out and find mates because they're permanently stuck to where they are. Sequential hermaphroditism seems to be explainable by a model proposed by a guy named Mike Gieselin at the California Academy of Sciences. And the idea is something we're going to come back to after the break. By definition, the only definition of the difference between eggs and sperm is that eggs are bigger. You do have species of protists, seaweeds and things like that, where they produce gametes, but there's no size difference. And such organisms are called isogamous, and the gametes are not called egg and sperm. You can't tell them apart by looking. They might be plus type and minus type. In yeast, they are type A and type alpha, but they're not eggs and sperm if they're the same size. The only definition of an egg is that it's a gamete that's bigger than a sperm, Gesundheit. The result is that it costs more metabolic energy to produce one egg than it costs to produce one sperm. I mean, a human egg is actually visible to the naked eye. It's about the size of a very fine pencil point. A human sperm is what the head is maybe 10 microns. A human sperm is maybe 100 times smaller than an egg. Eggs very often contain nutrient reserves, not so much in humans, but certainly in birds. The egg includes lots of yolk to feed the developing embryo. Sperm is basically DNA with a propeller on it. Sperm is DNA packaged as tightly as possible and a mitochondrion and just enough energy reserves to get to the egg. So producing eggs costs more energy than producing sperm, and available energy is a function of body size. The idea is that a large organism can acquire more resources than a small one can. The large one, if it's a predator, let's say, a large organism can take more prey than a smaller one. So a larger organism is going to have more energy available. So a small individual can produce more sperm than eggs. So the idea is that if you are a small female, you can produce very few eggs. If you're small and male, you can produce more sperm than eggs. And so you've got a better chance of reproducing successfully if you're a female, if you're a male, rather than a female, if you're small. On the other hand, once you get large, a large individual can now produce more eggs. So if you're a large female, you'll have more offspring than if you're a large male. So if you look at this graph, size is on the x-axis and then reproductive success is on the y. If you're a male, your ability to produce sperm and your chances of reproducing successfully pretty much increases linearly with your size. If you're a female, there comes a point where your chance of reproducing successfully shoots up once you exceed a certain size threshold. And so the idea is that makes it advantageous for some species to have individuals that start out as males and switch over to females. And I call these Miley Cyrus species. Why do I call them Miley Cyrus species? They get the best of both worlds. Get it? They get the best of both worlds. Starting out as a male, then they grow female tail. The best of both worlds. Eggs and sperm together mean you know you've got the best of both worlds. What do you think? I can still hit those high notes, I'll have you know. Thank you. One year at Christmas, my cousins got the Disney karaoke set, which meant that we spent the entire afternoon karaokeing along to Disney Channel songs of about, 8-10 years ago. Unfortunately, the only one that they really knew was Miley Cyrus, was Hannah Montana. So we all had to sing that song repeatedly over the course of an afternoon that really went on for longer than it should. So it's pretty much burned in my brain. You got the limo out front. Ooh, hottest styles, every shoe, every color. Yeah, when you're famous, it can be kind of fun. It's really you, but no one ever discovers. Yeah. All right. I guess the next thing for me to do is Next thing to do is what? Shave my head and start acting outrageously in public? Okay, right. So that would seem to explain why some species are protandrous. They'll start out as males and switch to females. It's because being a male is a strategy with a bigger payoff when you're small, and being a female has a better payoff when you're large. Protogyny seems to pop up in species that are territorial, where a male's reproductive success is not simply measured by the number of sperm he can crank out. The male's reproductive success depends on the ability to defend a territory and large numbers of females. A small male can't compete. A small male in this situation, if he tries to defend a territory and get himself a female, the bullies on the beach are going to kick sand in his face. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but there was a guy named Charles Atlas who used to advertise these bodybuilding methods in comic books. And they always depicted some 98-pound weakling at the beach whose girlfriend got taken away by some bodybuilder who kicked sand in his face. But then our little 98-pound weakling sent away for Charles Atlas's bodybuilding method and became so strong that he got to kick sand in the bully's face and he got his girl back. Okay, anyway, that's the origin of bullies kicking sand in your face. Yeah, a small fish that tries to function as a male is gonna get sand kicked in his face. He's gonna get stuffed in his own gym locker. The males are gonna give him swirlies. Anybody know what those are? Yeah. A small male can't defend against large males. So the strategy that works is for a small male to start out as a female. In that time, the female will grow bigger and eventually switch to male once the fish has gained size and strength and experience. So in that species, protogyny makes sense. You start as a female, you start small. As you grow, you start cranking out eggs. But once you grow large enough and you switch to male, you'll be strong enough to mate with a harem of females and be able to chase off any rivals, or at least have a chance at it. So all of these strategies sound really weird if you put them into human terms, right? You know, I mentioned my idea of having, you know, human biology like anglerfish, and, you know, every female might have tiny little shriveled males that consist of nothing but a little penis and testes dangling from her body like earrings. And in human terms, that's weird and messed up. In the living world, it makes sense. And that gets me on the whole topic of sexual selection, but that's actually probably a good place to take another break, even if it's, okay, it has been about an hour. I've got 11:30. So I do want to introduce something else, but I don't want to take an enormous amount of time. So let's reconvene at 11:40. I'll stop recording.